Viracocha and the Cosmic Warriors, author, El Votan, Order of Thyroidal Knights of America and Spain Octiridi Mexico. 2. 2.1 Introduction. This text was created directly to attack an enemy of which the reader who finds himself in the some spiritual path is unconscious. Here is exposed the lie and the trap as it is. This text will be hated by many until they try to destroy it, but there will be some who will be able to react in time and realize the deception in which they're involved. To give a spiritual message that is understood by all is not something simple when there are too many dogmas and too much confusion, but this text has the strategic objective of giving a message of a forgotten truth. This text does not seek to instill fear because fear is an illusion and a weapon of the enemy. There are many spiritual movements in America and Spain, and most of them are related to the 2012 issue. All those movements exposed here seek the evolution of the human being without revealing a terrible secret behind them. All these movements seek the evolution of the soul. Most people think that the evolution of the soul is the greatest good, but what if it were not so? Here the reader will have the possibility to discern for himself a reality that he does not know. Throughout history, there have been soul and spirit movements. Most of the spiritual movements of 2012 are based on the soul. The movements of the spirit have been persecuted by a secret mafia until almost achieving their total destruction. If this text is possible, it is because this occult knowledge has reached our days due to the sacrifice and work of great warrior spirits. It is important for the reader to know that this text is based on a spiritual knowledge that once existed publicly in Atlantis, in the Mayas, Aztecs, Toltecs, Greece and Rome. This knowledge is called Hyperborean wisdom. Before proceeding, it is important to clarify that Hyperborean wisdom is a knowledge of spiritual liberation, but it is not an evolutionary knowledge like many New Age movements, which are part of a worldwide secret agenda of the movements of 2012, an agenda that will be exposed in detail in this chapter. Here we enter into a dilemma between liberation and evolution. Evolution is to achieve the highest perfection of the soul, the highest perfection of a race, of a people, of this planet, the highest good. Liberation is to escape from evolution and its laws such as the law of karma, attraction, etc., etc., etc. That is why the Hyperborean wisdom is a science of spiritual liberation, of individual or racial transmutation, because it seeks that the spirit escapes from its material prison, that the spirit realizes that there is a deception. That is why this text seeks to reveal the deception and show the reader that there are always other ways, that the same system that has trapped us does not allow us to access them. Many ancient cultures have called this deception Maya. Many people who claim to be awakened and are in some spiritual movement believe they understand the Maya, but they do not. The truth of Maya could drive people weak in spirit crazy. 3. So we have many people in many spiritual paths trying to evolve or ascend, and almost nobody trying to free themselves. Logically, those who try to free themselves, the owners of the system will try to persecute them until they exterminate them with their agents, as it has already happened in other historical stages when they made the Crusades or the Inquisition, or when they almost exterminated the Aztecs, Incas, and the Native Americans. What a terrible secret reveals the Hyperborean wisdom that the owners of the world do not want anyone to know. The reader should know that if a book or text can be bought in a shopping mall, it is because the system wants it. It is part of their strategy to confuse more people who are trying to wake up. So we have many books, blogs, videos that talk about conspiracies, aliens, etc. It is important to use some concepts of Hyperborean wisdom before proceeding with the text. We will do so in a simple way for the reader who is not familiar with the wisdom. The Viryas or Viryas are apparently ordinary human beings, but it is not so. This name is used by the Hyperborean wisdom to name those semi-divine men or women who have something of which they are not conscious, an inner element of some extraterrestrial ancestor. That inner element is something very valuable for the owners of the prison of the Maya, for the owners of this material prison. That is why what the Hyperborean wisdom looks for is that those semi-divine beings can escape from the prison, but to begin with it looks for the Viryas to become aware of the great deception. So there are two types, the lost Virya and the awakened Virya. The lost Virya is the one who has not realized that there is a control, a prison, the one who lives his ordinary life without knowing why he is here, until the question arises as to why he is here, and he undertakes a search, the search of which will be explained in detail later. The awakened Viryas are those who have realized the deception of Maya, those who sometime in their lives have access to such knowledge. That is the Hyperborean wisdom. Studying the Hyperborean wisdom is like opening Pandora's box. Once the Virya opens it, he will never be deceived again. He will undergo an inner transmutation and will do the impossible to escape from the material prison. In that escape, the Viryas must have will of steel and courage to face such a strong reality. If the Viryas are strong enough, they will be able to achieve victory in their spiritual liberation. So it means that not everyone dares to walk such a difficult path. No one said it was simple as preparing the recipe for a cake, because the Hyperborean wisdom has the power to be inwardly different for each Virya. Because each Virya has a unique inner structure and an inner labyrinth of which he is not aware. That is why the wisdom has the way to transmute the Virya differently. The Hyperborean wisdom, as its name says, comes from a place called Hyperborea, is a place that is forgotten in time, but still there, a place that has received many names. The best known of them is Agartha. 4. Here we will explain a fundamental difference to avoid confusions that circulate on the internet about Agartha, a difference that must be clarified because the owners of this prison want to confuse by making the Viryas believe that Agartha is the capital of Shambhala. Its ancient name is Chang Shamballah. Agartha and Shambhala are not the same, they are enemies, and here we will explain why using the knowledge of Hyperborean wisdom. Both places are out of time. In Agartha dwell the gods loyal to the eternal spirit, the loyal Siddhas. What we mean by this is that they inhabit eternal beings outside this world, who promote the liberation of the Viryas from their material prison, from the spirits chained in matter, in the illusion of Maya. On the other hand, we have Chang Shamballah, a gigantic extraterrestrial city that lies between the earth and the sun, of which the lost Viryas are not aware. In this city dwell the traitor Siddhas and the extraterrestrial demons of matter, who promote the evolution of the soul and are the ones behind the ascension agenda and all the movements of 2012. We will explain why they call themselves loyalists and why they call themselves traitors. Millions of years ago, some spirit beings totally antimatter came to the solar system and penetrated through a portal that is still in Venus. These beings were known as the Hyperboreans. The division between the Siddhas, or gods, began because a group of them decided to make a pact with the god who had molded this material world. During this pact, some spirits, Hyperboreans, were tied to the matter to promote the evolutionary plan of the god of this place, that unleashed a war between the gods, since the god of this place, of this solar system in specific, was the projection of the One, the creator of this material universe, which was divided into many consciousnesses or devas, builders, to experiment with their creation. The problem was that when making that pact in this area of the solar system, the sphere spirits were tied to the projection of the Pazu, animal man, a being that did not evolve for being a creation of the god of this place, to that god molder of the matter we will call Demiurge, using the guidelines of the Hyperborean wisdom. When the traitor gods began their experiment and made a pact with the Demiurge, this generated the anger of the loyal gods, because they saw theirs tied in matter, in the illusions of the thousands of worlds that the Demiurge was projecting in matter. The eternal gods had the right to mold or create the worlds they wanted, but they did not have the right to bind their equals in their insane creations, since there are uncreated realms of the unknowable God, the true God, uncreated and eternal realms of the spirit where there was no evolution. Then the Demiurge began to make and undo his creations, each time making them more perfect. In the Hindu tradition, this action of creating and destroying is called manvantaras and pralayas. The traitor gods began to chain or more races from other kingdoms, in order to carry out the evolutionary plan of the Demiurge and push it to an unimaginable level. In order to do it and deceive the spirit races, had to use a very complex system called Kalachakra. With that system they were able to chain the uncreated in the created. 5. It is difficult in the current state of the lost Viryas to intuit how many Atlantises and Lemurians have existed. We will use the last Atlantis to continue the text. Then the war began, a war that has millions of years, in which the loyal Siddhas stole from the Demiurge several spaces in the universe created by him, in order to unleash strategies and free their own. This text is part of one of those strategies, and whoever feels it is also will join the fight and do his best to free himself before the world government is implemented and millions are sacrificed with the lies of 2012 and the planned planetary destruction of the traitor Siddhas. The worst evil is that the sphere spirit races can never escape from matter and forever sink into it, never to return to their origin. That is why the loyal gods desire the total liberation of the races trapped in this prison, or to take over as much of it as they can, because there are millions of non-incarnated sphere spirits in a dormant state or in other higher dimensional planes existing under the false belief that their denser bodies must evolve. When the loyal Siddhas tried to massively liberate their own with a direct intervention approximately 12,000 years ago, the traitors who control the Kalachakra from Shambhala destroyed everything in a cosmic war to sabotage the liberation. The loyalists led the so-called White Atlanteans and the traitors led the Brown Atlanteans. When everything was destroyed, some remnants of the White Atlanteans had to make strategies to escape, using lithic technology, and the Brown Atlanteans began to erase history or distort it as much as possible. One of those remnant groups that escaped from this insane creation were the Mayans. With the stone machines they managed to escape through their last walled city, currently called Tulum, although the name of the city was the walled city where the sun is born, because it is the place in all of Mexico where the rays of the solar logos, sun, arrive first. This was used by the Mayas as part of their escape strategy when the Spaniards arrived to the place the indigenous of the area asked what the place was called, and they answered Tulum, which means in Spanish, "This is my home." There are many incorrect translations on the web that say that Tulum means fence or wall. Although some Maya remain to leave a strategy, Withthe Incas, the Toltecs, and later with the Aztecs, all strategies sought the liberation of disembodied spirits, not the lies we are told today, which will be exposed in this text. It is important to know that when the spirits were chained in matter, their main prison is the soul created by the demiurge, which reincarnates indefinitely in the wheel of samsara controlled by the traitor siddhas. That is why when this chaining happened, a spirit-soul duality was created, not the duality of the soul that the servants of the evolutionary plan want to sell us. The duality of the soul is real, but it is part of the prison of the spirit when it incarnates in a physical body or microcosm as a man or as a woman, to understand such mysteries that are being. The black magic of Chang Shamballah. Excerpt from the text, The Return. We will use the last Atlantis to continue the text. Then the war began, a war that has millions of years, in which the loyal siddhas stole from the demiurge several spaces in the universe created by him, in order to unleash strategies and free their own. This text is part of one of those strategies, and of the created soul. If the reader is not able to feel these truths of the eternal spirit, it is because he is under a very strong effect of the illusory world and at the same time has very contaminated astral blood since the last cosmic battle. The more contaminated the astral blood is, the more confusion the Viryas suffer. That is part of the strategy of those who trapped us here. Because of that confusion, many Viryas can be trapped in the thousands of forms of the illusory world. The purpose of this text is not to explain the Kalachakra system, but some key points will be exposed to explain the strategies and black magic being used by those of Shambhala to deploy the spiritual movements of 2012. By exposing them in this text using the capacity of anamnesia provided by the Hyperborean wisdom, we seek to reorient and awaken the lost Viryas that are trapped under them, who came down from Agartha but are still looking for answers. The Kalachakra system can do many things. It has the capacity to erase the memory of the chained spirits, as well as to modify the designs of the created entities that come from the solar logos. The sun that we currently see is the vehicle that the solar demiurge uses to project its creation, then from the city of Shambhala of the traitor gods that is between the earth and the sun. They use the key to modify everything they want in the worlds of Maya. They use the key to modify everything they want in the worlds of Maya. They can even deploy global strategies so that the unconscious of millions of beings that are connected to the planetary collective unconscious follow those philosophies, and that is why we are exposing in this text the strategies of the enemy that they are using for America and Spain with the movements of 2012. When any spirit decides to descend to matter, he cannot escape the effect of Kalachakra, which means that for all those who descend with any mission, the effect of oblivion is inevitable. 2.2 The spiritual movements of 2012. After the introduction to begin the dissertation here exposed regarding the spiritual movements of 2012, it is important to know that many of the people who are in any of these movements are trapped by a myth that unfolded from the planetary collective unconscious to boost or modify the evolutionary plan of humanity, since the traitor siddhas seek to establish a new world religion based on all these movements as well as their world government. And they must do it, because if they do not modify the evolutionary plan and generate the partial destruction of the planet, they run the risk of the illusory world reaching its final perfection. Hyperborean wisdom calls these perfections intellecies. If that happens, they would also disappear and lose their physical immortality in this creation, along with their cursed city. They want to avoid the final battle at all costs. That is why it is important that the spiritual warrior who reads this book should know where he stands, as on which side he is working in this cosmic war, because maybe he is working without knowing it for his own spiritual death or for the evolutionary plan of the demiurge. Maybe he will also deny this text. Everything will depend on how strong he is to accept the truth and the fall of his internal to external illusion that has him trapped in the myth of 2012 that unfolds in many faces. That strength will be given to him by his spirit. 7. Uncreated, trapped in the created soul. Your true self by activating, becoming alert and realizing the deception of the created forms around you. All apparently new movements that come from the East are not new because they have been practiced there for a long time, but they are directed by the traitor siddhas. It is part of their strategy to put to sleep and trap as many sleeping Viryas as possible in America and Spain. All movements are directed by the occult hierarchy of the earth, by the great universal white brotherhood, who unknowingly or unknowingly are serving an evolutionary plan directed by their spiritual guides who exploit them for the benefit of the evolutionary plan of the demiurge and his creation. The International Synarchy, an organization of which nobody really talks about, runs all these initiatory movements. We will talk about it later, but we will start with each one of the movements to understand the difference between a synarchic initiate and a Hyperborean initiate. Between created light and uncreated light. It all begins when the sleeping Virya, the first thing that has been instilled in him is the belief in some religion or in atheism. Since he is a child, he is programmed to believe in some religion or to be an atheist, to believe in what science says, as he is mentally programmed with certain patterns controlled by the system of the International Synarchy. When the Virya by his purity of blood begins to question the religions and already went through enough of them, and his purity of blood makes him fall into many or know of many looking for the truth until he realizes that there is a control in them, this is when he or the Virya begins an initiatory journey, a change of lifestyle, begins to investigate and seek information. Then is when he falls into one of the traps of the illusory outer labyrinth that have the traitor siddhas and the new labyrinths that have been generating. A more detailed explanation of this matter can be found in the Crystal Book of Agartha, The Infinite Eight by Gustavo Brondino, although to read this text and understand it you must have the basis in the Hyperborean wisdom that can be found in the books of the foundations, otherwise the reader will not understand its information. Later on we will explain what these bases consist of. The first of the parts of the labyrinth of Maya in which the Viryas are trapped are the religions. 2.3 Religions. The religions in the world are many and varied, but in America and Spain, where we are focusing our text, the most powerful belief is based on Christianity with all its existing ramifications such as Christians, Catholics, Mormons, Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, etc., etc., etc. All these ramifications are intentional by the controllers of this prison and their servant leaders of the international synarchy. 8. It is important to clarify that when the Spanish conquest took place, the Catholic temples that were the first to be built were built in places where the telluric energy of the planet is very strong, so it is no coincidence that at least in the case of Mexico, churches have been built on top of the temples and pyramids of the Toltecs and Aztecs. 3 examples that we can mention here. Are the churches in Cholula, Puebla, which are built on top of the Toltec temples and pyramids. Second example is the Cathedral of Mexico City, which was built on top of the major temple built by the Aztecs. The third example is the construction of the Basilica of Guadalupe on the hill of Tepeyac, where an important Aztec temple was buried. These temples were built with the purpose of annulling the power of spiritual liberation generated by these stone constructions based on Atlantean lithic technology. By building the Catholic temples at the top, the servants of the traitor siddhas had the possibility to trap the unconscious astral and psychic energy of millions of Mexican Viryas and modify their genetic code with those stone machines. But not only this happened in Mexico, we can also see it in all America and Spain, where the temples were built in strategic points of telluric energy. In order to complete their strategic mission on the control over the Aztec blood and put it to sleep, from Shambhala they came up with the idea of inventing the myth of the Virgin of Guadalupe. This was executed by the Jesuit missionaries, using the indigenous image and Juan Diego. In this way they trapped millions in a myth that still exists to this day, and controls millions of Mexicans who blindly believe in it, and makes them kneel before the traitor gods who only seek to take advantage of their energies to complete the evolutionary plan of the demiurge. In spite of the scientific analyses that have been made to the image, the traitor siddhas have the technology to deceive even the most skilled skeptic or scientist. That thousands of impossible things have been discovered in the image of the Virgin is part of the control that they had planned to reaffirm the faith of their myths. So we have millions of sleeping Viryas trapped unknowingly in religions. To understand the prelude to the Spanish conquest and why the Europeans came to totally destroy the legacies of Hyperborean wisdom, we recommend the lost Virya who reads this writing to read the book The Mystery of the Belicena Vilca by Nimrod de Rosario. Also so he can understand how in the Vatican there have always existed the children of the demiurge and his servants as well as the children of the unknowable God. Although this sounds ironic, then we have the totality of a secret conspiracy network in America and Spain to continue putting the Viryas to sleep or to introduce them into new evolutionary systems that we will develop in this text. In Figure 1, we can observe the symbol of the fish used by the religions based on Christianity. We will explain what this sign means using the knowledge of the Hyperborean wisdom so that the reader of this text knows how the traitor gods use this symbol in the outer world of the Maya. When the Virya observes and introjects this sign, he programs his shadow sphere, microcosmic unconscious, to follow the evolutionary plan. Because the symbol of the fish is the sign of the Hebrew archetype, the evolutionary symbol of the soul and of this creation. Besides this symbol is a Tapa sign of the Odal rune, Figure 2, and its spiritual truths, when we speak of Tapa signs. 9. We are talking about signs that the traitor gods put over ancient spiritual signs to cover their metaphysical truths. When we speak of Hebrew archetype, we are not speaking of genetic racism, but of an archetype of the planetary collective unconscious. That is a serious problem for the extraterrestrial spirit races, Hyperborean spirits, since they are being dragged more and more to sink in matter by identifying themselves psychologically with a type, TYPO, of human, Pazu, animal man, that must inhabit the planet Earth, losing in this way the divinity more and more degraded, until merging with creation, and never being able to escape from here. Figure 1, symbol of the fish of Christianity and of the evolution of the animal man, Manu, Tapa sign of the Odal rune. It is found horizontally to program the unconscious submission of the Viryas to the evolutionary plan of the traitor gods. Figure 2. Odal rune, original ancient symbol representing the spirit of erect. This sign before the fish tapper sign was used in different ancient magical systems. It still exists in our days and is used by modern pagan magicians. However, what we are trying to explain is that the traitor gods cannot allow these signs to give guidance to the lost Virias and much less discover the secrets of the right angles taught by the Hyperborean wisdom. For this reason the fish sign has oval angles, which cause the soul subject to predominate instead of the spiritual self. After this, the Virya in his journey through the labyrinth of Maya discovers that there are Eastern movements or religions such as Buddhism or Hinduism, with all its ramifications, and understands that there are techniques to know himself. However, many of these techniques were already degraded in the East by the traitor Siddhas and do not fulfill their original purpose. The reader of this book must discover for himself which of those religions frees him and which makes him evolve in the matter. Here we expose all the paths that the lost Virya or Virya will follow in search of his or her purpose and his or her 10. Cause of being in this place. All the information and the paths of the Mayan world that you will travel in this search will be exposed. 2. For yoga, Buddhism and Hinduism. There are many types or methods of meditation, mantras and energetic exercises for the microcosm, many types of yoga, and various branches of Buddhism and Hinduism. However, most of these branches have transcendental meditation as a background, without realizing that the adept who falls into these branches is each day renouncing more to his uncreated spirit, as he enters into altered states of consciousness, relaxation or peace, gradually achieving the perfection of his soul or is evolving, trying to reach a greater and greater light of consciousness without realizing that he is being deceived by not explaining in any of these methods the difference between his soul, his spirit, and much less the enchainment in matter. Even when looking inward or when beginning to merge his soul with creation, he seeks to reach certain states of elevated consciousness until reaching the samadhi that Buddha reached. The reality is that the Buddha in which most of the lost Viryas believe is in Shambhala and ascended by merging with the demiurge. Basically, the lost Virya who falls into these paths can spend his whole life trying to rise to reach false enlightenment. The reality is that what the traitor Siddhas seek is to erase the spiritual sign of the origin of the Viryas by convincing them that it is a very positive path. Thus we see millions of Viryas who have managed to escape the traps of the Christian religions getting into these paths that will only lead them to their spiritual death by achieving the perfection of their created soul. To get rid of these paths of the illusory world of Kalachakra is very complicated, but not impossible, since the Virya lost in these paths is more controlled by his soul than by his spirit. Because the spirit is hostile to its material prison, to matter, and when I speak of hostility, I do not speak of hostility towards the other lost Viryas that inhabit the world and surround him. If the reader wants a more detailed explanation of the types of yoga, we recommend reading the Crystal Book of Agartha, The Hyperborean Martial Yoga by Gustavo Brondino. From all these Oriental spiritual movements derive some that we want to take into account in this text, since it is important because they are acquiring much power in America and Spain, and especially in Mexico, where they were brought as a strategy of the traitor Siddhas to put to sleep the Viryas and use them for their world plan of ascension. The first of them is the Ishaya movement. 2.5 Ishayas. This spiritual movement is based on ascension and the so-called 7 states of consciousness of the soul. The lost Virya that enters this path, in the first level of initiation, uses for phrases of neuro-linguistic programming that are directed to the squaring of the shadow sphere, unconscious, and the astral energies. This programming translated into Spanish is based on the Sanskrit language of the traitor Siddhas. Because it is important to know that Hebrew, Sanskrit, and English are languages that the Siddhas want to use to destroy the Romance languages, real artificial systems in this world of Maya. 11. That the loyal Siddhas created when the demons of matter made dead languages Greek and Latin. They use the energy of the voice to be able to perform this programming, since the voice has the power to create or destroy. Thus the Ishaya initiate is convinced that by mentioning the said phrases he is ascending. By concentrating on them he is ascending in the states. Finishing the first initiation, the initiate is made a chant with mantras in Sanskrit and a ritual with the image of Jesus Christ, and without knowing it, little by little his spirit is asleep and his sign of the extraterrestrial spiritual origin is resigned and blocked with the Hebrew archetype that is currently Judaizing humanity. The Hebrew archetype is explained in more detail in a deep study of the Hyperborean wisdom. The Ishaya movement is based on the story of the book First Thunder, where it talks about John and Jesus hiding in Tibet after their persecution and applying the Ishaya ascension techniques to be able to control the physical body and ascend. Anyone who has read the Belizeans book can discern for themselves that this movement within its disguised benevolence came to America and Spain under an occult agenda of Shambhala. Speaking of the movement in Mexico, this lasted a long time in the hacienda of San Francisco Cuadra in Taxco, Guerrero, anchoring certain occult energies that sought to trap millions in the future movements of 2012. Then we have the initiates who, after becoming adepts, decide to take additional courses where they become masters and select a color that represents them: white, red, black. Masters who are taught Sanskrit and more techniques to trap them in the Maya and thus unknowingly renouncing their spirit and perfecting the created soul. 2.6 Jnanapeetham. Founded by Swami Nityananda, a Brahmanic guru from India who uses certain mandalas and transcendental meditations to help the perfection of the soul. All Brahmanic priests work for Shambhala. The guru uses these techniques so that little by little the disciple will renounce his spirit, as well as promotes in his meditations the awakening of Kundalini, trying to exploit and hypnotize his disciples from a distance. Sent from Shambhala with a special agenda for America and Spain, the lost Virya's followers of his movement are being used to achieve the highest perfection of the soul and thus avoid their real spiritual liberation. Some lost Viryas of purer blood realize the deception when the guru asks them to wear a picture of the guru around their neck or make an altar for him, since any lost Virya with a certain level of astral blood purity can realize that doing so is following an idol. And after following so many idols in religion and other movements, the lost Virya is already tired of falling into the same thing. This is how the lost Virya continues to search and falls into other movements that we will continue to mention. 12. 2.7 Movements 1111. This movement seeks to anchor the necessary energy for planetary ascension, a movement that was generated after the harmonic convergence directed by the traitor siddhas to generalize the new leap in the future of humanity when the demiurge realizes its second evolutionary intention. Its followers, the lost Viryas in this path of the labyrinth of Maya, are based on the matter of the master cylinder of energy anchorage that is located in the Titicaca lake, and from there they direct or receive the energy towards all the nodes of the planet, especially of America and Spain. Most of the adepts do not know that their spiritual energy is exploited, since the traitor siddhas and all alien traitor demon races are moving the energy of the Shambhala vortexes from Tibet to South America to counteract the liberating energy of the loyal siddhas. That is why they are desperate in their desperation to grab adepts, since, by no means, they can allow millions to realize the lie. Many will realize and wake up and others will not accept it. They will deny this writing as well as all the writings of the Hyperborean wisdom. They will think it is from the enemy, but without knowing that the enemy and the friend that they believe are different energies, are the same energy deceiving them at the end of the day. In this movement, many adepts and many who do not know it observe in the clock the number 1111 without realizing it means that their unconscious is being dragged towards the plan of the traitor siddhas. If the lost Virya wants to escape from this, the Hyperborean wisdom gives him the weapons to use the power of the uncreated runes and resign that dragging. We recommend the lost Virya to read the crystal books of Agartha. In these movements of the 1111, they seek to open portals and anchor energies from Shambhala on key dates, such as the 8th of August, 08, or the 10th of October, 10, and in 2011 on the 11th of November, 11. For anyone who has studied numerology and knows the secret of numbers and vibrations, the numbers and dates in which these 1111 issues are working are anchoring unconscious energies to the new evolutionary plan, dragging many adepts to their own spiritual destruction, because as we mentioned before, one thing is the evolution of the soul, which is what the traitor siddhas seek for the benefit of their evolutionary plan, and quite another the liberation of the sphere spirit chained in the bodied soul that the loyal siddhas seek. 2.8 Essenes. This branch of the illusory world that the traitor siddhas promote and that is focused on the evolution of the soul claims to be based on the teachings of Jesus Christ. The reality is that it is not so. The Essenes already existed before the demiurge incarnated as Jesus Christ, and they were the ones who helped, guided, and initiated during his incarnation. This is a truth that reveals the Hyperborean wisdom and that we are exposing in this text. This is a truth that reveals the Hyperborean wisdom and that we are exposing in this text. The demiurge creator molder of matter of which Plato also spoke, imitated what the Christos light of Atlantis did when he tried to rescue the spirits chained in matter. There are several groups of Essenes. The original ones were and are Hebrew masters. There are some other groups that have taken that name as the Essene Psycho-Cybernetic Studies, which also promote the evolution of the soul based on the teachings of Jesus Christ. Many lost Viryas that promote those movements believe they are doing the greatest good by teaching knowledge that improves the evolution of the soul until its final perfection, based on the laws of the soul, for telling the followers that they are a spirit race chained in matter. Many of these groups can be found in some countries of America, Europe, but mostly in Mexico. Many of these groups were directed and created by the Universal White Fraternity. By exposing these spiritual movements, we do not seek with this text to make an in-depth study of each one of the traps of the traitor gods, but to expose the key points and not to make the reading of this chapter so complex. The objective is to expose the key points so that the lost or awakened Virya who reads this text can orient himself and understand the true cosmic war. 2.9 Reiki. Within the spiritual quest to know more about oneself, the lost Virya will sooner or later come to know the healing technique of Reiki or any other energy healing technique. It is no coincidence that nowadays attempts are being made to give free Reiki initiations all over the world, and more specifically in America and Spain, which is where we are focusing this writing, since all America and Spain play an important role in the liberation of the captive spirits and in the future of humanity. Those so-called third world countries have remained so because the traitor gods wish so. It is important to know that originally Reiki was created with another Hyperborean objective before falling into total degradation by the agents of the traitor gods, who also ended up bending the warrior spirit of the Japanese after the Second World War. Now it is being used as part of a secret agenda by the international synarchy to accelerate the evolution of the microcosm. The technique in any of its four existing levels of traditional Reiki seeks that the initiate channels the universal vital energy to send it locally or at a distance to people who are sick. That benevolent universal vital energy would be a fusion of the lost virya with the astral energy of the creation of the demiurge, although Reiki uses the distorted concept of Kyokai, or as the Hyperborean wisdom calls it, vril, spiritual energy. The technique does not seek at all that the Reikist initiate frees himself. On the contrary, it seeks to trap him in any of the Reiki myths of the planetary collective unconscious, and that he ends up succumbing and renouncing his spiritual self by merging with his material prison. Although Reiki uses the concept of lineage to teach the technique, this concept has no relation with the concept of lineage that the Hyperborean wisdom uses to refer to the great extraterrestrial ancestor. And it is important to make this clarification because the concept of Reiki lineage is a concept that was implemented by the synarchy. It is important that the lost Reikist Viryas, or any other Virya that is in any group of the new era and that reads this writing, know that this writing does not seek to offend anyone, since feeling offended is also something illusory generated by the soul. However, it does not mean not feeling anything. When someone begins to conquer the real strength of his spirit, he starts to control the soul, and 15. Can generate the emotions he wishes if he conquers the vril. This text seeks to awaken and destroy a lie that has been built throughout history, and that has us in a crucial question. So what is really sought with this writing and many others related to the Hyperborean wisdom is to touch the spiritual part of each Virya and achieve the initiation, liberation, and racial transmutation of the Viryas of America and Spain who are lost in the spiritual paths that the traitor Siddhas are proposing for 2012 and Ascension. This writing is focused for the Viryas on those paths because only you, who are currently a minority of the population, can make possible the awakening of a race and the return of the forgotten spiritual knowledge and values. You, despite being lost on those paths, are at some advantage with other lost Viryas who are in greater spiritual confusion in the prison of the Maya. Beyond our cultural barriers and the country of origin in America from which we come from, there is something that unites us, which is the language, the soil, and a blood that is not physical. In turn, that language unites us with Spain because our language, as well as other Romance languages such as Portuguese, are a system created by the loyal Siddhas. To go deeper into this subject, we recommend the reader to read The Crystal Book of Agartha, The Mystery of the House of Turds by Gustavo Brondino. And we clarify that here we are not promoting the issue that the traitor Siddhas are trying to promote, the issue that we are all one, and that we are all united with the heart, because the heart chakra is a prison and it is where the ego is mostly exploited. The soul love that the traitor Siddhas promote also imprisons. Although it seems that it liberates, it is not so. Because little by little the ego is yielding its will by letting itself be carried away by this false love and leading the lost Viryas as to merge with creation, instead of freeing themselves from it. One of the things that the Hyperborean wisdom proposes to the spiritual warrior is to take total control of his chakras, of his emotions, etc., of his microcosm, and not that the microcosm soul ends up subduing the I, that it ends up subduing the will of the spirit. 2.10 Red Path. Shamanism. Nahualism. In the Red Path and shamanism, but especially in Nahualism, customs inherited by the Mayas, Incas, Toltecs, and finally the Aztecs, there were some things that were still beneficial for the spiritual liberation of the Viryas and that had certain knowledge based on the Hyperborean wisdom. However, many things were lost in time, although this loss was intentional, due to the infiltration of agents and black magicians of the international synarchy that sought to destroy or degrade this knowledge under the lie that it was pagan and went against the Christianity that they wanted to establish by force to subjugate the peoples of America to the Hebrew psychoid archetype of the planetary collective unconscious. The black magicians that came from Europe knew very well what their mission was. It took them a long time to infiltrate in order to control the pure blood of the peoples of America who still conserved the memory of the loyal gods, of Quetzalcoatl, of Huiracocha. Although the peoples of America resisted, in the end they ended up infiltrated by the 16. In North America, the Druids coming from the English Empire subdued the people known as the Native Americans, and in Central and South America the Europeans also fulfilled their mission. And after the degradation of the customs, they began the miscegenation which ended up confusing and degrading even more the peoples of America until almost achieving the disappearance of the races. As it happened with the Aztecs, the same thing that they had already been able to do in Europe, they did in America. Some think that the Druids are good because they have written good things about themselves, but it is not so. They do it to deceive the lost Viryas. Basically, what used to be liberation ended up becoming evolution and slavery. Since Christianity concepts were added to the customs, the opposition to matter ended up becoming love for it, in concepts such as love for Mother Earth, to merge with it and to do the greatest good for the soul. The true issues of the spirit were distorted and confused with the soul. The love of the illusory world, Maya, managed to be established and is still preserved to this day in the customs of the Red Path. Customs that were previously tools to advance towards spiritual liberation ended up being used to perfect the soul. An example where we can see this concept is in the Temazcals. In the past, the great initiates entered caves or grottos, which symbolized the individual unconscious or shadow sphere, and after certain rituals the initiate began a new life transmuted into something different. A breakthrough was achieved in the liberation that same Temazcal sought. Transmute the initiate into something different under certain physical and psychic tests using certain elements of nature, but without merging or tying to it. Nowadays it is something totally different in some places where it has been degraded to the point of being used for profit or as a simple sauna bath without any spiritual background, and even if it has one, it does not fulfill the initiatory purpose. In the more traditionalist places where it is given a spirituals approach, it is used to benefit the microcosm, the evolution of the soul. Where the ancient concepts of grandfathers, grandmothers, directions, herbs, and Pachamama are used for the love of matter and the evolution of the soul. The sacred objects of shamanism, copaleras, objects of power, feathers, drums etc., were degraded over time by the confusion of the spirits in this dark age, which Hyperborean wisdom calls Kali Yuga. These objects still fulfill some magical functions, however, the metaphysical background for which they were originally created was lost in time. Those objects were created as artificial real systems for this illusory or Maya world, but in the end they ended up modifying themselves and making the Viryas slaves of them. Since from now on the Viryas would surrender their will to them to be protected by them or to be used as the only viable tool to achieve a leap in the evolution of the soul, thus forgetting that any object that one puts sense, external, can be used as a magical weapon if one uses his spiritual force to give it the function that one desires. The reality is that the shaman of the Red Road is unknowingly a lost Virya, trapped in his own rituals that are sometimes simple or sometimes complicated and that in the end up 17. Trapping him in that branch of the illusion that creates the Kalachakra key that the traitor gods control. There are still some peoples under the belief of the blood and they try not to mix it with the mestizos, but this knowledge is distorted since most of them, in spite of believing in the blood, they have already been domesticated, forgetting the true meaning of the blood, which is not only a genetic matter as it is believed and which clearly teaches the Hyperborean wisdom. The true spiritual warrior does not need external cultural objects to protect himself, since in his spirit he possesses the weapons he needs to protect or defend himself. The true warrior knows that what is outside is a projection of what is inside, and that what is outside traps in the world of forms. This external projection is through the reversion of the spirit sphere that is studied in depth in the Hyperborean wisdom. The key is to use the knowledge of the Hyperborean wisdom to open the records that were lost in time and return them to their original mission that the Incas, Mayas, Toltecs, Aztecs, etc. bequeathed to us, and that is part of the purpose of this text. Within the Red Path, we have some writings like those of Carlos Castañeda. For those who have studied the Hyperborean wisdom with their capacity of amnesia can know that it has a message of liberation or that it enslaves the world of matter. Because both messages exist in the texts of Castañeda. Of all the branches of the Red Road, the most remarkable is Nahualism, the most persecuted and punished magical science since Mexico was invaded by the Europeans. Many Nahuals were exterminated and their magic and stories of those warriors were lost in time. The true meaning of Nahul was interior or spirit, that which is inside. The greatest secret kept by the demons of matter is the exploitation of the uncreated spirit trapped in the microcosm to create and maintain the reality we know, or what most lost Viryas call real. In Nahualism, or as many call it Nagilism, it is currently given a focus on the duality of creation, the duality that exists in the microcosm. This approach was a distortion created by the servants of Shambhala, but part of its true foundations that were handled by the Toltecs will be explained below. Nahualism is based on the tonal and the Nahul. What really meant the tonal would be the part that the Hyperborean wisdom calls the soul or soul subject with all its existing spheres. Cultural subject, emotional subject, conscious subject, and the Nahul is the uncreated part or the spirit that does not belong to this creation, the will of the spirit. Originally the Toltecs sought to make the reversion of the spirit sphere trapped in the soul's microcosm to escape from the material prison as the Mayas had done. This is what the Hyperborean wisdom currently proposes. The Toltecs sought for the Nahul to end up totally taking over the tonal. They sought this by using certain physical and psychic techniques to achieve the inner transmutation, techniques that we will explain more in detail in the chapter of the Nagilism of the empty hand. Nowadays, many of the foundations of Nagilism are based on the dualistic creation of the demiurge. This is because for no reason the owners of the material prison can allow the spirit trapped in the lost Viryas to free itself or to tell of the great deception. 18. Tonal equals reason, judge, evaluate, witness, soul with its spheres, bodies that reincarnates and witnesses its lived experiences, prison of the spirit created by the demiurge and the traitor siddhas. Nahul equals will, spirit, uncreated spirit trapped in the creation of the demiurge, will use to create the culture of the world of illusory forms, and thus evolution exists. We have touched on some of the most important points of the Red Path to explain the lost or awakened Virya, as the traitor siddhas have a secret agenda unfolding in America and Spain to ensnare millions on that evolutionary path. 2.11 Types of magic: Santeria, voodoo, holy death, color magic. If Cuba is the major source of Santeria in America and allows this type of magic to exist without being punished, it is because the traitor siddhas wish it so. One of the greatest secrets of the international synarchy is that they allow and promote both capitalism and communism, and put them in an apparent confrontation to deceive millions of lost Viryas. On the other hand, the loyal siddhas created nationalisms and national socialisms, although later the international synarchy used the name of socialism to degrade it and hide it under communism and capitalism. That is why whenever any of those political movements of the loyal siddhas have arisen, they have been attacked by the international synarchy, creating coups d'état and wars. The Hyperborean wisdom is very clear in explaining in depth this matter, which will not be developed in this writing, but it is important to know that if Cuba is communist and Santeria is allowed without the Cuban government following its leaders is because they are part of the control. The same happens with other countries where voodoo is practiced, as Africa, and speaking specifically of America, in some parts of the Caribbean as Haiti. It is convenient for the synarchy that these things exist in order to psychically control the masses with metaphysical things and have them totally impoverished. It is difficult to know how many types of shambolic magic exist today, as some have emerged recently, such as the cult of the Holy Death that has emerged in Mexico, but we can hear of white magic, black magic, pink magic, etc. But we will explain to the lost and awakened Virya reading this text how these systems of the illusory world trap many and how they exploit them when they follow their path of spiritual search. Almost all current magical systems are controlled from Chang Shamballah. The way they work using some guidelines of Hyperborean wisdom is that these systems use egregores. Those egregores need to be fed through the vital or psychic energy of other entities, whether human or animal. The way this happens is that those systems of witchcraft or magic need some kind of sacrifice, either personal or of some entity. We will give some examples. The first thing that the lost Virya does is to make sense of those systems, whatever it is. By making sense of it or focusing on it, the requested Virya makes an energetic connection with the system, and without realizing it is phagocytized, which implies that part of his will goes to make sense of the system, and this follower of that type of magic is trapped through his unconscious or shadow sphere, as well as 19. All the spiritual paths that we have explained so far, the Virya is trapped, but we want to deepen a little in this one because this system is maintained thanks to its very powerful egregores that are fed by the black magic of Chang Shamballah to put the Viryas to sleep and open cracks in the auric field of the microcosm. Something similar does the addiction to drugs. After the Virya is caught, he starts doing good things. Let's say he does magic to help others, talking about the simplest magic like white or pink magic. Let's say he uses a red ribbon or a candle or some affirmation, written or oral. Unknowingly, the lost Virya is transferring part of his psychic energy to that outer symbol, feeding it. When that egregore receives the energy and returns the favor, convinces the Virya that the system works. Unknowingly, the Virya is already trapped in an illusion created by the system and the egregore, thus begins his path in magic. This is the simplest case. After this, the adept begins to attract astral entities that are maintained and are projections of those egregores. Perhaps those entities will communicate with him or her, and then teach him or her more techniques. Let's talk about a more complex case, such as voodoo or Santeria. Let's say that the Santero is already an initiate and has already been given his saints or his muetito in voodoo, his helping spirits. In exchange for favors or protections, the magician needs to make a sacrifice. Generally, that sacrifice is an animal. By sacrificing an animal in exchange for the favor, the magician transfers his will to the desire, and in turn the astral and vital energy of the sacrificed animal that is generally found in the blood and in certain organs. This energy is what feeds the egregore that is generally controlled from Chang Shamballah by means of the planetary collective unconscious. The sorcerer and magician receives the favor. Little by little, the energy of the egregore and the entities that are projected from it to the astral plane are tied in the unconscious energy or shadow sphere of the sorcerer and begin to envelop him, deceiving him in the world of illusion. The magician believes he is prospering and believes he is the best, believes he is Superior believes he is different. Without realizing that he is trapped, he can spend his whole life being a great magician or initiated in some type of magic, without ever knowing of his enchainment. Besides, the sorcerer will believe that he knows himself without knowing that he is trapped and involved. With time, the lost Virya will have yielded almost all his will to the magic system without knowing it, and that will not only be in this plane, but also in others, believing that his will is totally done. He will fear not having the protection or the help of his allies, forgetting that nothing, absolutely nothing, can with the pure will of the spirit. In the worst case, if the lost Virya, who is a wizard which cannot pay for the favor he asked for and will be punished, in the worst case he can be forced to disembody, attacked by the same entities, or punished by the demons of matter under the argument of not fulfilling his mission. The biggest problem is when any of these systems of black magic that is disguised as benevolence, and can give physical abundance that at the end of the day is pure illusion, is used to open astral portals. Or when the witches and magicians are forced to make great sacrifices, and we can see it nowadays in Mexico where the demons of matter are asking for great sacrifices and a racial cleansing. There are more than 50,000 dead, say it all, where externally we are seeing a fight that in reality is metaphysical. Since there are really many sorcerers behind those deaths and many followers of the holy death that are feeding that egregore in exchange for protections. Here we are not delving into every single magical system, such as voodoo dolls, bokeh, saints, 20. Godparents, guides, dead people, angels, reading of shells, one of the systems of divination in Santeria connecting to the records of the planetary collective unconscious, etc. There is a lot of public information about it. What we are looking for is to expose the trap of the traitor gods and to warn the lost or awakened Viryas of the terrible power of the Kala Chakra. When one falls into this path of illusion, the inner enemies emerge thoughts to the consciousness in the magician, which so that he denies that he is trapped, and the same happens with the other traps that we have explained, and maybe the lost Virya reading this text will think that also the Hyperborean wisdom is another trap, because really that doubt will emerge in reason, but a simple way to prove to the lost Virya that it is not, is that by all means the traitor gods have tried to destroy the primordial origin of the extraterrestrial spirit races trapped here. Nothing in history has ever been so punished as the Hyperborean wisdom. Whole kingdoms and races have been destroyed for possessing it. 2.12 Gnostics of Samal Aun Weir. Many Viryas lost in their search through the outer labyrinth will fall into the Gnostic current of Samal. Although his followers deny it, he secretly worked for the Universal White Brotherhood, and part of his mission was the deliberate plagiarism of works of Gurdjieff, Krumheller, Blavatsky among others, and his plagiarism adapted these works to the methods of Chang Shamballah to promote the evolution of the soul, methods that seek the destruction of the spiritual I, which they want to disguise under the concept of the ego. They confuse millions of lost Viryas, making them believe that the problem is the ego. They disguise the true spiritual I with the mask of the ego. The ego is the problem in all the traps of Shambhala. What they will never say is that the ego they want to disguise is really the manifestation of the uncreated spirit, trapped in the consciousness, conscious subject, Hyperborean concept. Many Gnostics of Samal have reached destruction or madness when trying to awaken Kundalini using the methods of Samal's gnosis. They use some methods very similar to Freemasonry that we will explain later. They secretly use bookstores to distribute their texts, making the lost Viryas believe that the texts are the greatest secret. In this way they make the Virya feel that he is someone very important and he is trapped in that part of the illusion. They handle many texts that are really promoted by the great Universal White Brotherhood like those of Blavatsky, and they make the Viryas believe that they are on the right path, even though they also make public conferences of esoteric subjects. Many of those speak of the evolution of the soul. It is said that at the end of his life Samal discovered the great deception and was assassinated and attacked by the demons of matter and by the black magicians of the White Brotherhood. Some say that at the end he began to say in his delirium that his teachers were demons. To free oneself from a path like Gnosis or Freemasonry is quite complicated, because although humility and service to others is preached, an unconscious craving for power and superiority traps the Viryas in these paths. All the works of Samal promote the evolution that the demons of matter desire, evolution versus liberation as we mentioned before. 21. Although the lost Virya who reads this text may think that this text seeks to discard all paths and force him to follow the Hyperborean wisdom, that is not the purpose of this text, but as previously stated, it seeks to expose the traitor siddhas and all their traps without beating around the bush. So we expose the entire tree where the branches come from so that the lost Viryas can awaken to awakening. 2.13 Masons. It is one of the most powerful arms of the international synarchy with its millions of followers around the world. From common people to big businessmen or politicians, millions of lost Viryas fall into the nets of this esoteric spiritual organization. Many spend their whole life and many incarnations belonging to Freemasonry without ever discovering the deception of the illusory world that Kala Chakra exerts when falling into this spiritual branch. There are several different Masonic lodges and various rites with their different degrees, such as the Rosicrucian, Blue Lodges, Symbolic, York Rite, Scottish Rite, the York Rite with its 13 degrees and the ancient Scottish Rite with 33 degrees respectively. We do not seek to make a total development of each one of its levels and chambers of Synarchic initiation. There is a lot of information about it, to the great masters of the lodges logically that their guides and masters. We'll never speak to them of the true chaining of the sphere spirit, since their masters are the demons of the matter which disguise themselves as great guides, just like the great universal white fraternity that we will develop in another point. Although they promote the spirituality of man, this is based on a better society and a better world through the evolution of the consciousness or of the soul, the 12 spiritual values that are disguised under the evolution of the soul and the greater good for society. In the end, millions of lost Viryas are fooled into believing that through the evolution and spiritual's development of the soul achieves liberation, which is not true. Someone can remember their lives, access their Akashic archives and never remember their chaining, because no matter how many lives are remembered, the latency state between them is never remembered. The traitor siddhas, owners of the wheel of samsara, will always erase those intermediate memories in each incarnation. Many, even if they're grade 33, all their lives will be lost Viryas, believing to be awakened and having managed to develop some qualities of the microcosm. One can have any level of master or companion or remain at the lowest level of apprentice during the entire temporal existence of the microcosm and never know the truth of the spiritual enchainment, although some knowledge is similar to the Hyperborean wisdom, as for example, the Mason seeks to control the body of desires, soul, and the Hyperborean wisdom proposes to seize the part of animal man, the part created by the demiurge that would be equivalent to the soul subject with its respective spheres. The Mason also tries to penetrate his shadow sphere, his unconscious or what they call the West, his inner worlds, and does so in certain chambers such as the Chamber of Reflection, which is similar to a crypt and uses the same principle that we explained with the Temazcals. Also the Mason seeks to escape from the material prison as proposed by wisdom. The problem lies in the fact that the Mason, not knowing the truth of his enchainment, the primordial war of the gods, when penetrating 22 into the inner worlds that lie in each of the 23. The 7 chakras of the microcosm, chakras that control the physical organs. In the end the eye remains chained in the heart. This is what the traitor gods seek. The Mason in the end will remain chained in what they call the temple of the heart, without ever knowing the truth of his chaining of his sphere spirit. These 7 interior worlds are a copy of the 7 exterior kingdoms of nature created by the demiurge, or we could say that they are part of the hells of matter where the Hyperborean spirits are chained. That is why in Freemasonry 2.1 for White Brotherhood, Great Universal White Brotherhood. This Kalachakra path is the most powerful arm of the Synarchy, and there is a very strong relationship between Freemasonry. The Great Universal White Fraternity is also known as the White Brotherhood. Although Freemasonry and the White Brotherhood are not the same, members of both groups carry out joint plans which also include orders of monks of the Catholic Church. In the Kalachakra paths of the enormous labyrinth of Maya, the lost Virya or Virya who has the most purity of blood and who has escaped from the other Kalachakra paths will sooner or later come across the signs or the White Brotherhood group and will be invited to become a great Synarch initiate. The White Brotherhood is the occult hierarchy of the earth and is directed entirely from Shambhala. The lost Viryas or evolved passers who are initiated or become masters of the Universal White Brotherhood will sooner or later be invited to travel to Shambhala and enter one of its initiation chambers. But this will only happen when the initiate has shown fidelity to his masters. Without knowing it, the lost Viryas on this path will never know the mysteries of their enchainment or their possible liberation, since at this level the lost Virya believes that he will ascend and that a great evolutionary movement for humanity is near. In this way the lost Virya is trapped in the belief that he has finally found after many searches his mission in life, and maybe he is convinced that he is one of the 144,000 chosen ones, as it happens with the other myths that we have already explained and that trap the astral and psychic energies of the lost Viryas. The mission currently entrusted to the White Brotherhood by the traitor siddhas is to physical construction of the New Jerusalem. With this they seek to make a replica of Chang Shamballah in 3D matter, as they did when they built St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican, Figure 2, which represents the Kalachakra key in matter and clearly explains the Hyperborean wisdom. Sign proposed by the traitor siddhas, we recommend the lost Virya to read the Crystal Book of Agartha, the runic martial yoga, to understand the mystery of the Hyperborean swastika. We have thus thousands of books that many agents of the Synarchy have intentionally written, or that many lost Viryas have written in their ignorance of the true cosmic war. The most interesting of those texts is in the book. The one being recently sent by the traitor siddhas totally degrades the image of Christus light image that has been totally sabotaged, distorted and reprogrammed in the lost Virya's THROUGHOUT history by the agents of the Synarchy, and that has led to the destruction or annihilation by the traitor Siddhas to thousands of awakened Viryas for discovering the deception. Christus Luz was an angel of fire like many others that have come, sent by the unknowable God. That envoy was also known as Christus Lucifer, or representative of the uncreated light. The ancient Mesoamerican peoples knew him as Quetzalcoatl or Mixcold. We know that this statement will clash with the beliefs of the lost Virya who reads this text, since it goes against all beliefs or sounds crazy, but the truth is that the Demiurge imitated with Jesus Christ the same thing that Christos Light did in Atlantis. The biggest mistake or sin within this matrix is that the spirit remembers that the sleeping Viryas become awakened Viryas, and even worse would be that they could transmute into Siddhas. The demons must prevent this from happening and at all costs use thousands of resources to destroy the past. That is why the books we are mentioning seek that the lost Virya see into the future, towards ascension and the new humanity, but never remember the primordial betrayal and much less know that their spiritual volitional energy is exploited for the benefit of evolution. 40. 2.20 The inverted mirrors of Optiridi. Before being able to expose the mirrors of Optiridi, it is important to mention that according to the knowledge provided by Hyperborean wisdom, in the reality of Maya all the psychoid archetypes or the archetypes of the planetary collective unconscious are inverted in the outer world that we call real. This means that reality is a mirror, or reality acts as a mirror. When the Optiridi movement led by the loyal Siddhas emerged in the reality of Maya, the energies of the planetary collective unconscious were going to manifest an opposition or inverted and distorted versions of the Optiridi movement. It was a risk that was known to happen and a risk that should be taken without hesitation, since many things are at stake if the traitor Siddhas achieve their new evolutionary plan for humanity, since the tyranny of the chain spirits in this place intends to be implemented in other spaces of macrocosmic significance. When we speak of spaces of macrocosmic significance, which is a concept of Hyperborean wisdom, we are speaking of other realms or worlds where they seek to chain other uncreated entities in the thousands of illusory worlds of Maya. So by taking such a risk, movements emerged that instead of being managed by a spiritual mystique or aligned to the mystique of Optiridi, plagiarized some symbols of Optiridi such as the Tyrodal rune, among other texts such as the Belicina Vilca, and basically appropriated them, and this is because the Viryas of these movements are being totally managed by the psychic subject. Their personality masks and unconscious energies based on their beliefs, dogmas, and that seek to deploy from the individual unconscious the myth of believing themselves to be a leader, or the great leader or chosen one, being that each one chooses himself and must seek his own liberation. Some of the movements that we can see as inverted mirrors of October Irodi are veganism, the temple of the gods, and many others that may emerge which will seek to benefit from the Hyperborean wisdom. This is not intended to create karmic links or conflicts between October Irodi and these movements, because the reality is that the enemy of the chain spirit seeks to divide the Viryas by their soul differences, creating elitism and segregation among them, making them forget that this is a war of all. Only someone who with his spiritual vision, with his Gnostic vision, understands the current situation will understand that the enemy always uses the motto of divide and conquer. The Hyperborean wisdom is not for sale, it is not used for profit. Only someone with his spiritual vision will understand that it is a free knowledge and that it seeks to destroy the lies and the falsehoods that have been established in the world. That is why it has always been persecuted and attacked, and it will continue to be so. Its followers will invent lies and defame them. They will be smeared in acts that the same synarchic system will carry out to discredit its real message, so that no one remembers the primordial truths of the trapped spirits and the extraterrestrial origin of the lost Viryas. This has happened to many peoples of the past, such as the Greeks, the Spartans, the Aztecs, the Incas. Clearly the Hyperborean wisdom speaks that this knowledge is not a belief or cult like any other, nor is it based on reason, although its texts are not easy to understand for many lost Viryas. No one said that the liberation of the chain spirit was easy. The wisdom 41 seeks to dispose the spirit to remember who it is, and to know its present situation and the cause of its enchainment in matter. It is important that the lost or awakened Viryas or Viryas who read this text understand that the Optiridi movement does not seek to manipulate the masses as the Synarchy does. What it seeks is to transmute individually or racially, and that from this movement study circles are generated throughout America and Spain. The international Synarchy together with the traitor god seeks to manipulate the lost Viryas using all possible means for the realization of their evolutionary plan. Chapter 18 OCTIODAE Strategic Objective provides a more in-depth explanation of the subject and what the strategy seeks to achieve. Author's note: millions of Viryas are being dragged by the movements of 2012, which seek the evolution of the current religions, which have already lost power, and are using the archetype of Jesus Christ to evolve under different faces that are disguised under the movements of 2012, where the perfection of the soul created for the evolution of a new humanity is sought, sinking more the spirit in the illusion of matter, leading to its disappearance by merging with the demiurge. and their creation, the traitor siddhas seek to make many believe that evolution is the greatest good. They use scientific, religious, esoteric and other means to convince the lost Viryas and put them to sleep. They seek to erase history, distort it, erasing any vestige of the primordial war and the chaining of the extraterrestrial antimatter spiritual races. They seek to sink them in the mire of matter. Only the awakened spirit and conscious of its current situation understands that oblivion and evolution are the worst misfortunes. The most difficult mission for an awakened spirit is to enter a hell of matter, where all the spirits asleep in that hell see everything as heaven, as something beautiful and perfect, as something that the creator of matter made, as something that has a divine order. Without knowing it, the spirits in that situation believe they are awake, but they are not. The most difficult thing even for an awakened spirit is to have infinite courage to endure that those who are equal to him attack him, call him crazy, want to trample him, crumple him, destroy him, see him as something bad and horrifying, without knowing that an inner enemy uses them to attack the awakened spirit who only seeks to give a message from the eternal and uncreated realms, where evolution does not exist, where pain does not exist, because love and hate generate pain to the chained spirits by exploiting their infinite energy for the benefit of evolution. History of those realms that the owners of hell want to erase at all costs, to keep the captive spirits asleep in the material prison. To give a message to bring out of the material mire the spirits trapped in the illusion of humanity is not a mission that anyone would dare to undertake unless he really in his desperation sees his own totally lost and loves them too much, but not with the heart, but with the spirit, an eternal love that is not known in the world of the material forms of illusion, of the mire, since that 42 implies for a free spirit to renounce his own freedom by chaining himself in the world of forms in order to give a message, and with that message to declare total war on the executioners. The awakened spirit, however, knows that his message will not be well received or understood by many due to the spiritual confusion they have, because many will not understand that all that exists in creation are copies of other realms, of the true God, of the unknowable. Many will not understand his struggle and his message, but with only one that he has managed to rescue will be a great advance until the last of the captive spirits in the material prison can leave to his original kingdom. The day will come when the gods and goddesses trapped in matter awaken in one of the thousands of illusory worlds, realize the great deception. When that happens, they will claim and fight first inwardly for their liberation, by claiming their freedom with their spiritual blood to the heavens of the unknowable. The gods loyal to the eternal spirit will return and invite the chained spirits to fight one last time for their freedom, and the final battle will begin. 2.20 Dialogue. The following dialogue is exposed as the final part of Chapter 2 to expose the real plans of the executioners of this prison. A dialogue between the two groups that have enslaved us here. Year 2004. Chang Shamballah, Universal White Brotherhood, Occult Hierarchy of the Earth, Demons of Matter, Traitor Siddhas. How are you doing with the agenda in the Americas and Spain for our implementation of global governance? International Synarchy. We are doing very well. After inventing the story of the attacks to the Twin Towers and the war against terrorism, everything is advancing marvelously. We have already destroyed almost all that was left of socialism in America and Spain. Some are resisting in the countries of North Africa and the Mediterranean area, but we already have an agenda for them. Our infiltration forces have already started to work in those countries, knowing their culture, language, and social structure. In a few years, we will be able to destroy and overthrow those governments inventing the usual story, that they are dictators and that the whole world population believes our bought media like CNN. Even though those governments work for those wretches of the Siddhas of Agartha, we cannot allow socialism to take the masses out of poverty, and we cannot allow people to become nationalists, much less to become spiritually liberated and escape from matter. We must continue making them believe that our capitalist and communist systems are the best that exists. Also our spiritual movements, we must make them 43. Believe that they are the best that exists. 44. Under the 2012 affairs are going wonderfully in Spain and America. The population will never suspect that behind the political movements there is always a hidden spiritual part as part of our agendas. They still believe that they are separate systems. Now yes, our world government under a false peace is almost a reality. Soon we will be able to give all economic and political power to God's chosen race, the Jews. They almost own all the private banks in the countries. Shambhala. We must not be confident. We still know that there are great nationalist forces working for the Siddhas of Agartha in South America. Even though we destroyed and infiltrated Peronism in Argentina and confused everyone with the Pinochet and Allende affair to bring down nationalism in Chile along with all its servants, we do not want surprises. They need to eliminate the root of the problem. Therefore, most likely they will try to ask for help someday. If that happens, we will have to eliminate them. Our evolutionary plan cannot be delayed, much less the arrival of our Messiah who will rule them all. Year 2007. Shambhala. We like the way things look down there on Earth. If we achieve world government, we will be able to sacrifice millions under the fire holocaust. We have planned to erase now if forever any trace of the uncreated realms of the unknowable, and thus be able to use the Earth project in the whole galaxy created by the ONE. We have noticed since some years ago strange energetic movements in some countries like Mexico. We need to prepare a special agenda for them. International Synarchy. Nothing can stop us. Much less now than no one, at least in this dense material plane. The agenda we have planned will be based on one of our branches to generate free money from the social systems without the need of taxes. We are talking about drug trafficking. If it has worked in Colombia, it will work in Mexico, and from there we can transfer the same strategy to other countries in America. In Spain, we have most of the young population controlled by alcohol and drugs. There are more unemployed and our spiritual movements are strong. Many people have already believed the 2012 and Ascension issue. We have many agents disinforming with the New World Order issues and the reptilian issue, even though part of our agenda was to wake them up a little, to control them and convince them that our system based on peace and love is the best there is. In Mexico, we have the idea of sacrificing thousands to prevent the energy that could awaken many from increasing. We will use those sacrifices to convince those we catch in our spiritual movements that the deaths are due to a change of frequency, that it is because they are. 45. We will convince them that they must come closer to God, and many will either reinforce their faith in religion as they have always done and as we have controlled them for over 500 years, or many will seek other paths that we have already planned, with all our New Age issues. We will send all necessary agents from Europe and Asia. We will also see to it that Mexico becomes an economic powerhouse after you sacrifice the people you asked for. We already have over 30 years of infiltrating weapons, creating corruption and doing social experiments with them, as well as many other countries. We will use the same agenda in all the countries of America, until we have been able to erase or confuse as much as possible any vestige of the origin of the spirit, of the celestial origin. Year 2011. Shambhala. What is the current status of the situation? International Synarchy. The confusion in the world of the extraterrestrial race's spirit chained in matter is increasing, which is giving us a great advantage to manage the planetary consciousness of the masses at our whim. Most of them believe that the soul and the spirit are the same. There are beings that have realized that there is a world conspiracy. They talk about the New World Order, the world bankers, and the wealthiest families in the world, but they will never know the truth of their slavery. Most of them believe that with love the frequency of the planet will increase and their problems will end. Most of them believe in the peace that we are proposing and that we are all one. We never thought we could achieve such a goal of indoctrinating the captive spirits in such a way. Most of them have been left with matters of the heart, so they will never remember that they have a blood memory. Much less will they be aware of their astral blood and infinite self. We are achieving that our archetype of Jesus Christ evolves to another level. Under different faces in the evolutionary movements of 2012, we have achieved almost the total Judaization of the races with divine Hyperborean lineage. Nobody is capable of revealing themselves even ideologically, and the best of all is that nobody knows of the existence of our organization. Most believe in the Illuminati, but they do not know that this is disinformation and only a branch of our organization. The best of all is that we have managed to convince them that Shambhala is the most beautiful thing in the world, and that Agartha is the capital of Shambhala. Our agents of the great universal white fraternity have achieved their goal. A few who have discovered that they are not the same, Agartha, Shambhala, and discover certain branches of paganism, have been convinced of our lie that the fight for the control of the world is between the Illuminati and the Luminari. We have managed to confuse even the most skilled. The youth totally idiotized with our drugs, the increase of obesity, the love of usury, sports, media, and programming from a young age in the institutions. 46. Educational has been successful. We have almost achieved the TYPO of human being that we want to inhabit our society. Let them forget their past and look towards the future, towards a better modernized society, until we manage to totally erase the conflict of the celestial origins. If someday some spirits become aware of our organization, they must believe that it is only a political organization, but never know that the synarchy also dwells within them, in the inner cultural programming. They must never discover that they have an inner prison that chains the self in the world of material forms. If some spirits would wake up, we would have to exterminate them, as we did with the Cathars and many other peoples, for their heresies, for remembering the true conflict of the origins and the uncreated kingdoms. We cannot allow them to know the difference between Christ Light and Jesus Christ. They must continue believing that they are the same. They must continue to believe that Jesus Christ is their Savior, and Lucifer, Anael, and all those envoys that have come down from the uncreated realms are the bad and corrupt ones. We have managed to totally distort the true history since Atlantis. Even the last purest people left in America were forced to stop believing or taking different beliefs from their liberator God, from the envoy of the unknowable, the feathered serpent they called Quetzalcoatl. We have managed to make them forget that history. Making a recount of our agenda, we can say that since our first agents of the Universal White Brotherhood began to launch the 2012 issue, the first thing we had were the channelings directed by you from Shambhala to be able to write books in this reality, such as the books of Kryon, Ramtha, among others. In this way we were able to push our great gurus and servants in favor of our evolutionary plan. Great agents that contributed to this change were Drunvalo Melchizedek, Deepak Chopra, Sai Baba, among others. After we launched that agenda, we could fully deploy the 2012 myth of the planetary collective unconscious with the issue of the harmonic convergence in 1987, and in this way we trapped millions without knowing it in our next great leap for humanity. To achieve this end, we used the masculine and feminine duality with which the microcosm is created. We divided the 22 voices of the creator demiurge in the 1111 issue to anchor the necessary energies for the different agendas that we already had planned. In this way we used a lost Virian named Jose Arguelles, to whom we gave an aspect of the Kalachakra key so that he could complete and modify the ancient Mayan knowledge after having learned it from some traditional masters, so he could create the calendar of the 13 moons, which allows to know the designs of the created soul, that after discovering the deception we had to eliminate it. Most have been hypnotized with our magic and have believed the story of Velatropa 24 and everything he wrote in the Book of the Probe of Arcturus. Best of all, he used and sabotaged the nickname of Votan, the Sidher whom hardly anyone remembers anymore. That forgotten name of Odin. Thus we have since those dates many who believe they are awakening and who have convinced themselves that there will be ascension, not knowing that they are being dragged along by an energy that we deploy to trap millions unconsciously. 47. Just as we experimented in Venezuela with our special agent Connie Mendez and her metaphysical books, so all our agendas are already deployed in America and Spain. We have sent disinformation agents and druids like David Icke to reinforce the belief in reptilians, and we have succeeded in getting him to defame and confuse many by explaining his theories about Nazis and ancient cultures. We have made a breakthrough in our confusion and misinformation with the aspects and agendas that the loyal Siddhas deployed in the past in many countries such as Germany. Most of the spirit sphere chained in matter believe that white magic and black magic are different things, but they should never discover that they are the same, and you control all those energies from Shambhala with the Kalachakra system, and thanks to the Tiferet sign that the demiurge gave you, thanks to the creation of the system, those gods that call themselves loyalists or liberators, they could not stay any longer on the planet. So we closed communication with those who could be liberated or reoriented. Most people will never suspect that most of the ships are from our governments and Shambhala. The ones contacted by extraterrestrials are following our plans or being deceived as we had planned. Neither should they know that all this disinformation is part of our agenda. Chang Shamballah. The same strategy to discredit socialism that they used with the president of Spain, the president of Venezuela, and false Peronism with the president of Argentina must be used against any movement planned by the Siddhas of Agartha. International Synarchy. Now that we have managed to distort the true image of nationalism and socialism with a nationalist spirit, people must stop believing in them. They must never know that we have used the name of socialism to hide our capitalism and communism. They were right in what they had predicted. In Chile, there was a plan to ask for help from the Siddhas of Agartha, but we managed to prevent that movement in time by shooting down the FARC plane in which several members of the government, media, and military were traveling to the Juan Fernandez archipelago. We already started to infiltrate the communists in the student movements. Chang Shamballah. We will send the relics of Pope John Paul II to Mexico, worked with our black magic to put to sleep the Mexicans who might wake up. You must continue believing in the religious institutions that you founded. If this strategy does not work, sooner or later, when you stop believing in religions, you will fall into the new paths that we are creating, so that the Hebrew archetype of Jesus Christ evolves under the faces of all the movements of 2012 and the new era. We will also send our best agent to talk about peace and progress, to talk about evolution. We will send the Dalai Lama. We will use these two strategies to control the unconscious energy of 48. Thousands of Mexicans who are on both paths, those of the old school who believe in the Catholic religion or Christianity, and those of the new school who are already in some 2012 movement. International Synarchy. As Mexico is the spearhead for the whole strategy of the militarization of America, and you want to be a world power, we place you within the hierarchy of the new emerging economies. But in exchange, we ask you for the human sacrifices that you asked for to clean and modify your spiritual sign of your extraterrestrial origin. So we can modify your genetic code and create the loving TYPO without rebellion that we want you to be. We will do it with all the agendas we have scheduled to distract you during all this year. The violence agenda already started some years ago, and it looks good. We will also do a meeting with the President of Argentina and the President of Mexico to launch the same agenda over there. After that, we will do a joint agenda under the face of the fight against drug trafficking with certain key countries. If the strategy worked in Colombia, it will also work in Mexico. We are also planning to build in Brazil the replica of Solomon's temple as requested, to anchor the necessary energy from Shambhala and to be able to annul the energy left by those damned Nazi Hyperboreans, energy that we have not been able to eradicate. We need to continue distorting the truth about the Second World War and continue psychologically programming the new generations with poor education and television. End of dialogue. The lost or awakened Virya who reads this text should be aware that one day a defamation will be raised against us of what is written in this chapter and in the complete text. Just as many books were destroyed in the past, this Hyperborean text will not be the exception. That is why we ask the reader to pass on this chapter that was made public, so that more people may possess it, not without first knowing and discerning to whom it is going to be passed on. It is useless to have so much spiritual knowledge if it is not used wisely. It is not necessary to spend on weapons, gunpowder, the runes. Spiritual weapons par excellence of thousands or millions of awakened Viryas are enough to destroy the 3D material prison, as mentioned above and explained in more detail in chapter 18. If the awakened Viryas spin the lever rotatory swastika, this would accelerate the macro structures of the Maya to their final perfection, and the traitor Siddhas would be forced to intervene as in other epochs, which would unleash the final battle. Although the reader knows that some Jews control the world banking, there is division in them, and many of them could also be sacrificed by their priests if the planned fiery Holocaust comes to fruition, and this is mentioned very clearly in the crystal books of Agartha. We hope that the lost Virya can be guided to awakening with this chapter, and the awakened Virya, as a warrior of the Eternal, will use it as a weapon to destroy the lies and darkness that have the extraterrestrial spirits asleep in matter. Sacred Rune Tyrodal, rune given by the loyal Siddhas to the Order of Tyrodal Knights of the Republic of Argentina. Sacred Rune Tyrodal, rune of victory, rune given by the loyal Siddhas to the Order of Tyrodal Knights of America and Spain. Both runes were given to two different pontiffs. When we speak of pontiffs, we do not speak of religious matters as handled by monotheistic religions, but of the links or bridges between the Viryas and the Siddhas.